Welcome to the second episode of the University School True Crime Podcast. I'm one of your two co-hosts, Joey Valerio. I'm here joined with
Jordan Heiser. And then our three guests,
Theo Dengler, Romeo Palmieri, Graham Price.
And today we will be covering the Kendrick Johnson case.
So, Kendrick Johnson was born October 10th, 1995 in Valdosta, Georgia. And he died January 11th, 2013 at the age of 17. So, Kendrick attended high school in Valdosta, Georgia, and he was on the football team and the basketball team. And he wanted to play college football when he graduated from high school. And then he also played one unspecified sport. But as pretty obvious, this was cut short in high school. So, on October 10th, he was supposed to be watching some type of sports event at school, and he was supposed to come right home after that. And at 10 p.m., his mother realized that he had not made it home from school that day, and then his mom drove directly to the school, and she drove around the school to see if he was walking around or hanging out with friends, or like things that you would expect somebody would maybe normally be doing. But she found no trace of him and called the police and reported him missing. And so the next day, she went to the school and, along with the school, made missing persons flyers and posted them around the school. I mean, I don't know, it's just kind of like, you would think in such a populated area with a bunch of people, it would be very hard for somebody to go missing.
I mean, it's pretty typical stuff that you see in a lot of these cases where, like, someone goes out and doesn't say, like really when they'll be back, and then they just never come back, and then, like, a family member or a friend notices that and then says something about it. So, I mean...
I think it's kind of interesting, saying that he was at school and he was supposed to go to a sport event. It's like, kind of interesting that the school wasn't able to notice that he wasn't there or something went wrong.
And I mean, as you'll see as this goes on, it was more the case that he didn't even make it to the sporting event, which I believe that's coming up right here, but it's just he wasn't really noticed missing, or it wasn't considered suspicious that he was missing from his classes, like, at all, it seemed like. And so, at the crime scene, the police had never taped off the area that was considered a crime scene, which, coming from somebody who studies forensics, that's the number one thing that you have to do, is make sure nobody can get in there and tamper with evidence.
That's step one.
The fact that they didn't do that makes it a lot harder to actually solve this case. And along with that, they failed to wear protective coverings over their feet, which, again, is one of the number one things you do before you even show up at the scene. And so the theory was that Kendrick had fallen into a wrestling mat and suffocated, and which caused his death. And, well, as I just said, he was found inside of a rolled-up wrestling mat, which was in the gym. So this theory didn't really make sense because his shoulders were 19 inches wide, whereas the wrestling mat was 14 inches wide. So it would be kind of hard to accidentally fall into a space that's smaller than you. Yes, there have been cases of it where people have fallen behind things or things like that, and it's caused other true crime cases like this, but still, to be in this type of situation with a wrestling mat which is rolled up so tight that it's hard to actually, like, fit your body into it, it's just, that theory doesn't make sense, at least to me.
Yeah, having been around those wrestling mats whenever they're rolled up, like, for pretty much my entire time in school, I feel like everybody has been around those at some point. You know that they're not, the center, like, hole going through is not very big. That's not something you just fall into. some of them there isn't even like a center hole. It's just they're like panels of foam that like fold up, and it doesn't make sense to me that that would even be considered.
Yeah. Also, because there's a large difference in size, like, it's not like his shoulders were 19 inches wide and the mat was like 18 inches wide, so that maybe he could have squeezed in accidentally. But it's like 14, it'd be very, very hard to get yourself into a 14-inch hole with a 19-inch hole.
Right.
And with the theory they came up with, because it was at a school, they might have wanted to put that out there to not worry as many people, and to kind of just have like a simple solution to the, because probably a lot of people during the time were freaking out.
Yeah, and I think that also has a lot to do with the sketchy police work, even though it shouldn't have been that way. I think it was more so crowd control than anything, just because it was such a big school that, like, it would have been very, very hard to keep control of the scene if it was this big spectacle and a bunch of people were super, super interested in what was happening. So, I mean...
I can get behind that, because this isn't really something this isn't something that happens in a school. This isn't like an everyday thing that just you'd see in schools.
Yeah, but also I think they definitely should have at least tried to do more, because of, like, when it happened like after school, either after a sporting event or in between a sporting event and school, so it was presumably someone from the school or who had access to the school.
Yeah.
So you would definitely want to take that off so that they couldn't come and tamper with the evidence.
And so, as we get into the evidence later, you'll see there were a pair of shoes found kind of separated right around there. But there were also another pair of shoes, and there was also a hoodie that was found near his body that were never collected as evidence. So you would at least think they would take that to try and find any DNA that they could, just to at least try to get a lead to go off of.
Yet another example of the police doing a very, very bad job at paying attention to details that are probably very important to this case.
Yeah.
I mean, that's even similar to last case that we covered. It's like...
Yeah, with the Black Dahlia.
Yeah, the police work, it was just not
It's
there.
just- there's like...
It was just very, very bad.
It's very, very lackluster.
And so, as well as this evidence, there was also dried blood on the wall near where his body was found, but the blood was dismissed because it was determined that it was not Kendrick's, and they never found out whose it was. So obviously, it is in a gym, it's in a school, could be anybody's, could have been there for a long time, but eventually it starts to like change color as it dries over time, so you'd at least be able to get some sort of timestamp of where it could have gotten on the wall.
I find that hard to believe that they never found out whose blood that was, because how can you know it's not Kendrick's without knowing whose it is?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think they were really locked on to the fact that it was an accident, and they were kind of just ignoring everything else.
Like, when was this? 2013?
Yeah.
So they definitely had the technology to do like the DNA analysis on the blood.
Yeah.
I just don't see a world in which they know that it's not Kendrick's and they don't know whose blood it actually is.
Exactly. It just baffles me that was never considered any importance of evidence.
Right.
Like, at least the tiniest bit of importance would have put that into the case, but can't change that. But so, kind of going back on what the scene was, so Kendrick was found rolled up in a wrestling mat, as you can assume based off what we said, and around 10:30 a.m., so obviously he didn't even make it through the school day, a group of high schoolers were found in the gym, or they were in the gym, and they noticed some socks sticking out of one of the rolled up wrestling mats. And so obviously we know this was Kendrick, but they didn't at the time, and they thought it was a joke and did not think there was a body inside. But as they got closer, they realized there was a body inside of this mat. So they lowered the mat to the ground, which they didn't realize was a crime scene at this time. So as I said, it got tampered with pretty early on. And they noticed a strong scent of multiple bodily fluids and possibly a decomposing body. So, I mean, at that point, they kind of realized it wasn't a joke. They realized this was something that was actually serious, and they shouldn't have tampered with it how they did, but...
I mean, you can't really blame them for, for moving the mat or anything, because they weren't aware of the situation when they were in it until they saw that it was real.
Exactly.
So.
When they say they noticed that strong scent, that could be like he must have been there for like a decent amount of time for that to eventually happen and that process to start. So.
Yeah, even if it was just a couple hours, still at that point, that would have set in, and it still would have been pretty apparent that there was a body in there. And so, in this gym, they found 2 pairs of shoes and a school book. And like I said earlier, there was also the hoodie that they found. And one pair of these shoes was inside of the mat next to his legs, but the other pair, however, was split up. So one was outside of the mat, and the other was in the mat under his head. And I don't know if it's covered later, but with it being under his head, they thought that he had dropped the shoe into the mat, and that's part of the reason why the theory that he fell in was he was going for the shoe so that he could get it back, and he got stuck and he couldn't get out. But still, at the same time, to try and squeeze yourself into that small of an area, being a guy with such broad shoulders, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, also you could just like move the mat
Exactly.
to a better position. So I don't know.
So then after the body was found, the school went on lockdown, as you could probably assume, and the police were then called right away. So his mom was in the school at the time and heard through the school that her son was found in the gym rolled up in this mat. And so, Joey, you can kind of help me relate this to the last one with the Black Dahlia. Again, they weren't told directly.
Yeah.
Like with the Black Dahlia, her mom found out through
through some people who said she won a competition.
Exactly. And like this one,
yeah.
she heard it like through the school's PA system or whatever.
It's just a very reoccurring theme, at least in the past 2 episodes, that have been indirect notification, which again ties into really lackluster police work, because that's part of their job, is to notify the people who are close to them.
And so when they found him, his body was not in good condition whatsoever. So he was found upside down in an inverted position inside of said wrestling mat, and it was obviously sitting on its side vertically. And so they store a bunch of wrestling mats in this gym, and most boys will store their stuff in these mats due to them not having lockers. But when he was found, his hands were facing his feet behind him, and his feet were towards the top of the mat. And so that would also explain why they saw the socks sticking out first. And when they got to the autopsy, the cause of death quickly came back as asphyxiation, and they said it was nothing more than a tragic accident. And the thing about him was his face was extremely swollen. They believe that he was upside down for at least 21 hours. So you got to think, if you're even if you're just messing around and hanging upside down, all the blood that rushes to your head so quickly for 21 hours, that would explain a lot on why his face was so swollen.
Yeah, that's not very fun.
Yeah, but that also explains why they said it was asphyxiation, was because being upside down like that, you get a lack of oxygen to your brain, And with being in such tight quarters, that oxygen level decreases extremely. Okay, so the family arranged for Kendrick's body to be exhumed for a second autopsy because they believed that something wasn't found in the initial one or something like that. And so they hired a private pathologist whose name was Dr. William Anderson, and he made several new discoveries. There are many theories and conspiracies due to his findings, but the pathologist found that every single organ inside of Kendrick's body was removed and replaced with crumpled up newspaper. And so the people who first processed this body were the Harrington Funeral Home in Valdosta, Georgia. And they processed the body after it was initially done by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And they said that they never actually received organs with his body. And the funeral home owner said that he was not involved, but whoever did the autopsy probably realized that his organs were completely destroyed through natural deterioration, which, again, if he was left out for that long with no preservatives like they would put on a dead body, yeah, you would expect something like that. And he claims that whoever did the autopsy threw the organs out, and the funeral home were the ones who actually stuffed the body. Now, this isn't a very abnormal thing for some funeral homes. Like, if you ask for a body to have the organs removed and stuffed with like newspaper or something like that to make it look better, so that it doesn't like concave on or in on itself, some people will ask to do that, or they'll ask for it to be stuffed with something so that it's not like just in really bad shape. But they never asked them to actually do any of this. And so the Georgia Secretary of State office did an investigation on the funeral home and didn't find them guilty of any wrongdoing. So, again, could go either way. But they did admit that it is a little insensitive, odd, and cheap for a funeral home to be using newspapers. Supposedly they stuffed his body for free, or pretty much free, to help the family with this tragedy. And another key discovery that the pathologist made was that there was some type of blunt force trauma on the back of his head and his neck. And he claims that suffocation would not leave this type of mark, and it was a very small bruise, which was less than an inch. So the theory that he just fell in and got stuck just kind of goes out the window right there, because that's not going to happen from just falling like that. I mean, that just, at least to me, from the first autopsy, they should have found something like that.
Yeah, it definitely seems like someone knocked him out or something, because, like, the blow right to the back of the head, then they shoved him in there. There's no way that could happen because you just fell in.
It's kind of weird that they didn't find that on the first one.
To me, this just goes back to the really, really crappy work that they did trying to figure out what happened.
And so police say that he was wandering around the area climbing on the mats trying to get his shoes, like previously said, and that he fell into one of them, and they were not clear if they meant he was reaching in after a shoe or if he found a shoe near it and was holding the shoe and then fell in. And police waited 6 hours after they found his body to call the coroner. Normal procedure is as soon as police find a dead body, they call a doctor, a coroner, or something to give a time of death and stuff like that. Or if they have an identification, then identify them right there and then. Again, horrible police work. It's a common thing in a lot of cases, sadly. But so the day after Kendrick was found, Reverend Floyd Rose of the Valdosta Southern Christian Leadership Conference was approached by a Johnson family member and asked to run an independent investigation into Kendrick's death. So he agreed to help them, and from that point on, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference has been helping his family with this case till this day. So in April 2013, the Johnson family, during a public rally, held hands and blocked the way to the county courthouse, or the local county courthouse, in protest. And they ended up being arrested for civil disobedience. Reverend Rose put up his own house as collateral to bail Kendrick's mom out of jail so they could kind of keep this protest going. So moving forward to May of 2013, the Johnson family held a fundraising event hosted by civil rights activist Al Sharpton, who is a huge name in the political world. And Al gave them $500 of his own money, but $5,000 were raised, and people were at least led to believe that this was going towards reward money. However, nobody's sure what this money ever went to, and the family never set up the reward themselves. Instead, local businessman Roy Taylor gave Reverend Rose $10,000 to use as reward money. That kind of puts the Johnson family, or at least Al Sharpton, into a bad situation, because mysteriously $5,000 go missing and we don't know what happened with it. And so on July 28th, 2014, the Johnson family finally filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the the local county board of education, its superintendent, and the principal of the school. Their lawsuit basically stated that Kendrick didn't just fall into the mat, but he was attacked and injured in some way and then put into the mat. The lawsuit really pushed that there was a racist motive behind this, and it specifically talked about one kid who they reported had bullied Kendrick in the past, attacking him even in front of coaches and teachers. His mother had reported this to the school in the past, and nothing ever came from this. And the lawsuit also claims that the school did not even have good enough security cameras to ensure the safety of all of their students. So again, it puts the school and everybody there in a very bad spot, because obviously if a white student is beating up Kendrick, a black student, in front of teachers and coaches, and nothing is really done about it, I think it's pretty easy to say that there could have been racist intentions.
It's definitely not far-fetched to call that racially motivated by any means.
Also, it's crazy to me that the police still considered it an accident at the start, because there's this kid who goes missing at a school event, and they know that he's been attacked by this other kid previously. So it's crazy that they wouldn't even consider that something, like there was some foul play involved. They just immediately went to an accident.
I just agree with Theo. I agree with Theo because it's just like hearing that there was, like, even the school knew and the mother knew that there was a kid that was known for bullying Kendrick, and they didn't come to that conclusion sooner, and they wanted to immediately just go to, accident, is just, like, kind of shocking through this whole case.
Yeah, because you take Kendrick at a school event, and, like, if a school event, there's lots of kids there, some of them, like, wander around, and, like, Kendrick, if he did fell in, he probably would have, like, screamed for help. The fact that nobody would have hurt him, and then the fact that there's also a hit on the back of his head, indicating that someone probably could have knocked him out to make sure that he doesn't scream or anything like that. Kind of suspicious.
Yeah, I feel like there's just a lot of people involved in this, like, in solving this case, that are just trying to, like, sweep it under the rug like it didn't happen. I feel like that probably is because it happened at a school. This isn't something that typically happens at schools, so I think they're just trying to cover it up, make sure that it doesn't become, well, they were trying to make sure that it didn't become something that we're talking about today.
Which, ironically.
Obviously didn't do a very good job of that, but...
And so, going to the Bell family, which is who they're referring to with the boy who had previously assaulted Kendrick, the boy that they're referring to, his name is Brandon Bell, who is a wrestler, or at least was, at this high school. And Brian Bell is Brandon's younger brother and a former classmate of Kendrick. Again, this entire family is just really shady. So Rick Bell, their father, is an FBI agent, which has caused many conspiracies to pop up even more. And Kendrick has talked about these two boys, or at least had talked about these two boys, being very mean to him and harassing him at school, that it had also been happening for a while. And so there's a magazine called Ebony Magazine, in which many articles were published stating that the brothers had something to do with his death. So really just putting out publicly that a lot of people think these brothers did something to him that caused this. And so Brandon had got a really good scholarship to be on the Florida State University football team as a linebacker, and a year later his scholarship was revoked because of this case. And they were afraid that they would get scrutiny for handing a potential murderer a scholarship, which is understandable.
Makes sense.
And so in 2014, it was rumored that there was tension between Kendrick and the Bell brothers over a girl, and that could have really flared tension, made aggressive attacks a little more frequent, is what it seemed like it would be since it had happened in the past. And so in August of 2014, their parents, the Bell parents, filed a $5 million lawsuit against the magazine, and they claimed that Brandon and Brian were being harassed and bullied by other people because of this article, and because Kendrick's mother had talked about how these two had harassed their son. And so these two boys had refused to help with the investigation at all, and they soon became possible suspects, which, considering they refused to help investigate at all, is pretty common to be considered a suspect if you don't want to help.
Yeah, that's pretty shady, because even if, like, if you didn't do it, you'd be like, sure, I'll help you, because there's no way that any suspicion can fall on me, because I know it wasn't me. But if you don't help, then I don't know, it's suspicious.
It definitely doesn't help you in the case of,
Yeah.
oh, I didn't do this. It doesn't help your case at all.
Yeah, trying to prove your innocence.
Like, that even goes back to last case. How, like, her father just didn't
Yeah.
want to go anywhere near her when she got out of his house in L.A., and then he wouldn't even identify her.
Right, he wouldn't even identify the body. That's
So,
just,
of course he was going to be a suspect. And it's the
Right.
same thing with this. They didn't want anything to do with it, and they were some main suspects. And so sometime in 2015, Reverend Rose had contradicted his previous statement and said that he no longer believes Kendrick was murdered. So that really just puts the Kendrick family in a bad spot, with somebody who had supported them since it happened now saying that it probably wasn't how they thought it was. And so in January of 2015, Kendrick's family filed a $100 million lawsuit. This lawsuit said that Rick, the boy's father, ordered his sons to kill Kendrick, and they claimed that his death was not an accident and it was a murder, obviously. So the county attorney, Jim Elliott, stated that the allegations were unfounded and baseless, and that any response will be made in court. So again, not really wanting to say anything to the press because that can put them in a bad spot. So the Department of Justice filed a motion to, quote-unquote, stay the case, which was in November of 2015. And a stay of proceedings is a ruling by the court that would stop further legal process in a trial or other legal proceedings. So it was denied quickly after that, and Kendrick's mom dismissed the lawsuit. They canceled it because they were actually hoping to wait until the Department of Justice ran their own investigation and see what the result of that was. Then they were going to refile the suit, but because his parents dragged in all these other people, accused people of things, and then dismissed their own lawsuit, they were sued for more than $850,000 for attorney's fees and $1 million for defamation charges or damages. So again, really just not putting them in a good spot. Yes, they had this tragedy happen to them, but they were really not helping themselves out. It's really just kind of throwing themselves under the bus at that point.
Yeah, I feel like they're just making radical decisions at this point because they're still probably very upset at this whole thing, especially because they can't figure out anything, so they're just throwing out random stuff and just hoping something would come out of it.
Yeah, they're definitely, because I mean, that would be so terrible to know, like, your child died and also someone else might have done it, but you don't know who. And it's kind of the police's fault because they did such a terrible job with the investigation. So I'd be very, like, they're definitely not thinking straight right now.
And so, on June 20th of 2016, the Department of Justice finished their work and they announced that they would not file any criminal charges related to Kendrick's death. And fast forwarding to about a year later, August 10th, 2017, a judge ordered that the Johnson family must pay more than $292,000 in attorney's fees to the dozens of people they ended up accusing. This was about the time that people found out the picture of Kendrick looks really bad. And this was after his body was autopsied. And this really hurt their credibility, and less people started supporting them in this case. I've seen what he looked like when he was found. It's not good. It's just like the last case, Joey.
Yeah.
It's not something you want to see. It doesn't look good at all. If you can just even go off the description that I've given, it's not a pretty sight at all.
Yeah, I'm personally, I'm glad I haven't looked this one up, just based off the description. It's kind of like the Black Dahlia, where I think the description alone is enough to make you not want to look it up.
Yeah. And so, another really big face was Chris Prine. So CNN decided to interview Chris and said that he said that he was not going to discuss the case because the case was closed at the time. And then he changed his story to say that he won't discuss the case with an interviewer because he doesn't want to. And they kicked him out quickly after that. And so, on June 20th of 2018, Kendrick's mother announced that they were going to exhume his body for a third autopsy. So, 2 days later, June 22nd, the exhumation and autopsy took place. And then, an update from March 10th of 2021, the county sheriff, Ashley Polk, who was retired at the time the case was closed, decided to reopen the case and try to get justice for the Johnson family. And there's also been a supposed audio confession that's been released of the Bell brothers. So going to surveillance and timeline of this entire thing. So Grant Fredericks was hired by CNN and his team at Forensic Video Solutions to analyze the hundreds of hours of surveillance footage. It was just a constant line of just footage. And he says the jumpiness of the video is not the result of editing, but there are some major problems. He says the files are not original files at all and are not something that investigators should rely on for truth of video. They have been altered in a number of ways, primarily in image quality and likely in dropped information loss. And there are also a number of files that are corrupted because they have not been processed correctly and are not playable. So Fredericks questions if the high school provided all the video footage that they had, and there's a chunk of time where the cameras have no footage at all. There were 4 cameras in the gym that are all motion activated from when the lights turn on to when the lights turn off. And the chunk of time happens to be when Kendrick supposedly went missing. So at 12:30 p.m., Brandon Bell would have been on the bus as it leaves to go to a wrestling tournament. So 1 p.m., surveillance shows him entering the gym by himself, and he was marked absent in his following class. So at 4 p.m. of the same day, Brandon Bell had a wrestling tournament, which basically said he would not have been able to be at the school at this time. I mean, that's really the most of it, but that the surveillance really kind of tells me that the school is hiding something, and again, that puts them in a bad spot, and it really doesn't help the case at all.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about how I feel like they're trying to sweep this under the rug and cover it up and try to make it seem like it didn't happen, because there is no reason that they would have to not provide video footage if they had it. And so like the fact that there's like video footage from before and after the period where Kendrick went missing, but none of the actual time frame that he went missing in, it just doesn't sit right with me, and I think that there's definitely something going on behind the scenes there that we're not being told.
I mean, I personally think it's the Bell brothers, because obviously they were the main suspects, but also because their dad was in the FBI, and it would be pretty easy for their family to really hide information because of that government connection. I don't know about you guys, but I just think it's one of those two, if not both.
Yeah. This case is also like really annoying personally to me because there's so many opportunities for them to like actually been able to catch the person. Like if the police had done a better job at the start, if the person who did the original autopsy again did a better job, if the school had actually had like all the and given the investigators all the camera footage, and there's all this stuff, but now we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if the school, like the police should have first, when they went to the crime scene, they could have seen the cameras. They should have been like, hey, do you have like any footage? And I don't know if they did, and then the school denied to show that or anything. But that would have been something that could have been like a key part of all this.
Yeah, I think the whole case is just sloppy and not thought through properly since the beginning of when we started it.
I mean, I obviously, like I said, I think we're all in agreement that the Bell brothers are definitely a main suspect, and I think a lot more could have been done, and to this point, since the case has been reopened, there haven't really been any big leaps of information that somebody's found, and it just sucks because it's cases like these that happen to these younger people that just suck, because the case that got me into true crime and forensics was a case of a young person being murdered, and it's always these cases that just hit home for me. It's just a young person, somebody our age. It's like it just, they never make sense to me.
Premature deaths are never something that are. I feel like there's always some sort of injustice, regardless of whether there's foul play involved or not. I feel like any premature death is sort of unjust in a way, because there are these people with their whole lives ahead of them, and who are yet to go on to do great things, and it's pretty upsetting to see that cut short, and especially in cases like this where it probably could have been solved or prevented.
Yeah, something that I found interesting when I was reading through this all is that something that when Kendrick's body was being autopsied for the second or third time, I'm not sure which, they described the trauma on the back of his head as getting hit in the head with a 45-pound dumbbell. That's something that just can't really happen on accident if you just trip and fall
Yeah,
out.
that's a lot of force.
Yeah.
Just to have that much force, like you said, it's not accidental. But to this point, it's unsolved. I mean, again, we think, Joey, just like we thought last case, we think we've pretty much solved it, but legally, it's unsolved. So
all we can really do now is wait and see where it goes.
Yeah. And if there are any major updates, I'll probably cover it in another episode, just to kind of go back and get that information out. But it's really all we can do to this point is hope. And so this has been the second episode of the University School True Crime Podcast.